When we talk about a lower and lower target, what we're talking about is what poor people have to do. We have to decarbonize our economy in any case. Line everybody in the world up in order of their emissions. We're on this end, big emissions. Hunter-gatherers are on this end, low emissions. And then you stack them up like this so that the value on the curve is the emissions of this guy and everybody to the left. The top 500 million people emit half of all the emissions. These people are all wealthy. They make about 100,000 euros per capita each. This is a problem of the wealthy primarily. In contrast, cumulatively, the bottom half of humanity, the 3.1 billion bottom half, emits almost nothing. So little that if you actually gave them all a diesel generator, it'd be hard to actually see the signal in the atmosphere for a long time. There really isn't a very big conflict between economic development and greenhouse gas emissions, simply because economic development is a problem of the poor. Poor are too poor to own anything that emits. And greenhouse gas emissions are a problem of the rich, of all of us. Let's suppose that we were going to set emissions limits for countries based on this principle. Use this number in every year to figure out how much a nation was going to be able to emit. And what you do is you say, well, to set the emissions limit for, say, the United States, we tell everybody who's not from the United States to leave the line, okay? And then we would sum up the emissions of the capped people at the cap, those beneath the cap, what they would have been, right? And we get a total emissions limit for the United States. So we could do this for every nation, just using one number, sort of a fair principle, everybody treated the same. The US turns out currently to be the least fair nation in the world, the most over the limit. But if it adopted the Lieberman-Warner bill, then it would be right on the target. European nations similarly have to deliver on targets that most have already legislated. Big surprise here is China. This is China's business as usual emissions going out to 2030. This is what it would have to under that scheme. The cut is the gap between the two curves. China has to cut emissions almost immediately and would become the biggest cutter in about 30 years. And it's because China is a nation of rich people embedded in a titanic nation of poor people, and the poor people are all moving into the rich nation. All right? And so the question is, in your own mind, you ought to think to yourself, does a Shanghai tycoon who has emissions like me have any less responsibility compared to me for the greenhouse problem? India, everybody always says India is like China. This shows BAU for India. That shows the cap. There's no gap. All right? India has very much lower emissions than China and a more even wealth distribution. And so India looks like Zambia here. India, under a scheme like this, wouldn't have to cut its emissions until after a quarter century has passed.